Let's take a look at some of the worst pitchers in 2025 and figure out how they're going to be better in 2026. I'm going to talk through these guys from a who are they perspective, the problems they're running into, what my plan of attack would be to fix those problems, and then I'll give you a confidence level in terms of their ability to actually be good in the coming baseball season. First up, a name that is still available to the highest bidder, Zach Gallen. The offers for him, according to sources at last year's deadline, were so bad that the D-backs decided to hold him, QO him, and now teams are trying to figure out whether they're comfortable giving up a draft pick to sign him. And I imagine those offers were so bad because the corrections we're going to talk about are probably more off-season than in-season. So if you're acquiring him with his 4.83 ERA and career-high barrel rate at last deadline, you're maybe not totally confident you could get him to be good down the stretch and into the postseason such that he would actually start games for you. Who is he? He cuts his fastball. He's a bit of like not necessarily a higher slide. He's more like an average arm angle guy. Really good changeup knuckle curve here. These are the two pitches that I think a lot of the time he's trying to get to. And then you kind of have this blob of slider cutter for him, which in his career has almost never been good. I would say he's more location over raw stuff. The four seam in particular last year just really wasn't that great. And the angle of it, it's weird because the angle of it that is good is that it's a called strike machine. It generates called strikes at about a 41% rate, seventh highest in Major League Baseball among qualified pitchers, better than about 85% of four-seam fastball. So he's able to get ahead in counts. I just think he ran into problems in more of these bridge counts, like the 1-1 situations, and also in two-strike counts when he didn't really have the changeup or curveball feel. The problems here, a lot of barrels allowed to right-handed hitters, and left-handed hitters he failed to generate whiffs. So that's what we're going to try to figure out how to correct here. And the positive around him is that the sinker he added last season is really what makes a lot of sense. He had like a 3-4 start stretch where he used this pitch more than like 20% of the time to right-handed hitters, but then he backed off it. Not entirely sure why. The thing that I think is incorrect about this pitch is perhaps the orientation of how he's throwing it. So this pitch should be better in my eyes. He's an average arm angle guy, as I mentioned. He's not like a high slot guy who's going to have trouble creating depth. He cuts his fastball, and yet the sinker that he was creating, the shape he was creating last season, was more of like a pure runner. If you look at it relative to the average sinker for a right-handed pitcher who has his arm angle, he was getting more lift on it, which I think prevented it from being a totally effective offering, which you saw a lot of the time from a location standpoint, is it would just rip in on right-handed hitters. And I kind of want this thing more in zone with more depth. He reminds me a bit of like a Max Fried. He doesn't cut the ball as much as Max Fried or like a Joe Musgrove, but both those guys throw one-seam sinkers. This is one that you kind of just cut, let it rip, and you see I'll throw up Joe Musgrove's here, which kind of just fades down really hard. This is a beautiful ground ball pitch in zone. So the thesis here was like, okay, you're on the right track throwing the sinker. I just wonder whether it's under optimized in a way that the acquiring team could look at it and go, this pitch can be a lot better. We can get you on the ground more versus right-handed hitting such that your barrel rate comes down. You're not so reliant on the four-seam fastball because he has good command. He's trying to like go away with the four-seamer. I think it'd be really nice to go in with this two-seamer, but actually put it in zone such that it's enticing enough to generate swing on and generate ground ball on. So I like the fact that he's already on the right-handed hitter fix. On the left-handed side of things, a little bit more complex here. I'm not as confident in the solve, particularly because he hasn't already revealed the solve, because I'm sure if he had the solve, he would have implemented it and not been terrible versus left-handed hitting. So four-seam away. So he's good. Like the location point here, you know, a lot of the time we give guys good location grades. I think a good way to think about it is like your four-seam fastball, Gallen goes away to right-handed hitters, so that's to his glove side, and then arm side to left-handed hitters. And he can dot both those locations relatively well. But if you look when he was good, so like 22, 3, 4 area, what happened was I thought, just visually to me, in terms of where he was locating the four-seamer and the cutter in particular, he's like rotated away from hitters a bit. So he used to be a bit more up with the four seam and inside with the cutter, which wasn't particularly good, but perhaps a byproduct of what counts he was throwing it in. And then in 2025, he kind of rotated away where you see more true away four seam, not as much up. And then the cutter was just in the zone way too much and this thing got absolutely clobbered. So I like the idea of potentially rotating him back a bit where he's more up and away with the four seam and then give me like off plate in with the cutter because you could grab called strikes away with the four seam. And if you're behind in count, then like pray that the cutter doesn't get barreled in or third. The other angle here, that's maybe a bit more like, okay, maybe the right-handed approach gets him back to a low 4s ERA. How do you get him back to like the 3.5 ERA, which is really good? And I imagine a team acquiring him is trying to hunt. It probably comes back to figuring out another slider here. I love the concept of going towards like a death ball, which is this kind of like downer slider shape. I think he could hold velo on it around like 83 to 85, such that it's still a really effective offering. This is kind of the dream for me, because I think he would have a rough tendency to zone this pitch, such that you don't have to rely so much on the four-seam fastball in zone for a called strike. And this pitch also should be able to generate a bit of whiff. So I like it overall from like a, how do you actually get to some promised land upside if the current template of what he's throwing is not good enough. So that's kind of where I'm approaching him from. Better sinker, more sinkered right-handed hitters to pull down the barrel right there. I think the rotation from a location standpoint, and I can actually play with the locations on him because he has good command, will help against left-handed hitting. And then if you add in some downer slider, you're really maybe actualizing some more potential in terms of the whiff there. That's how you get him to be like a 3.5 ERA guy from the 4.83 he had last season. My confidence level here, pretty high. I'm going to go 8 of 10. So I'm pretty confident he can make these tweaks because he's already shown some tendency to, and I like these field guys with some location. So I'm positive on this. I think this is a guy that, if acquired, will be good in 2026. Jake Irvin is next. He was the only pitcher among qualified starters in baseball last season who had a negative WAR. Not particularly good, but the point of this is to dig into some grimy guys and try to figure out how they could be better. The big thing to point out with the Nats, entirely new pitching department in there. Paul DeBoni comes in, brings in Simon Matthews, new assistant pitching coach. Tons of new pitching infrastructure. We're going to see a lot of usage changes, I think, on a lot of these arms. So when you're looking at raw projections on some of these national starters, I think there's more variance within them because of what I anticipate the Nationals to do from a usage standpoint. Much of that we're going to get into in this video. And particularly on Jake Irvin. Who is he? Big dude, big extension, below average release point, kind of like a lower arm angle, not super, super low, but he's below average. His velo ticked down 2 miles per hour, just under that from 24 to 25. I'm not just going to say these guys should be throwing harder if their velo's down. Of course, that would definitely help. And in Jake Irvin's case, absolutely. But I do think even if he stays around like the 92 area, there's a path for him to be better. And it probably threads through not throwing either of the fastballs he throws, four-seam and sinker, as much as he is to either-handedness of hitter. He also throws this sweeper, which is tagged as a curve. I saw the grip. I think it's a sweeper. It's kind of like a downer shape. And this gets to the larger problem he has, which is very bad versus left-handed hitters, which is a recurring theme we're going to see with a lot of the right-handed pitchers we talk about in this video. He's got worse K production there compared to righties, and he's allowing more barrels to left-handed hitters. I do not like this lefty approach at all. He's throwing like 12% sinker. He's just ripping it middle of the plate. I don't know what's going on there. The oppo-handed sinkers that work have a lot more drop. Think of like a Logan Webb. Irvin's is not in that category. The usage here should basically be non-existent, or if he's throwing it, it should be hard away targets in count situations, which really isn't going to work from like a zone standpoint. So I don't love that. The four-seam fastball is being thrown too much at 92 miles per hour. The approach is fine. It's not crazy flat or really good in a way that I would justify like 38% usage to left-handed hitters, especially when it allowed like a crazy high barrel rate. Yeah, 12% barrel rate. You got pounded. Like, I don't think you need to throw that thing that much. Curveball sweeper, he's like way up there combined usage on both these pitches in any situation, which is part of my concern here. So lefties in basically any count, he's around like 60% usage, which above that, 70 almost. I just don't understand it from the perspective of you have multiple pitches here. Some of them suggested from the underlying data that they performed better than the four-seam and the sweeper curveball thing. And yet we're throwing those 70% of the time, even ahead, behind. I think you just entirely rip up what he was doing from an approach standpoint and rework it. So you go, in my opinion, you would go curveball, slider, change, early count. I don't want any fastball early count. If you're going to try to convince him that his fastball is good, it should probably be a pure elevation pitch in deep count situations. The thing I'll point out, one thing to look at, early count zone rate on non-fastballs is something I like kind of IDing to understand if this guy can move off fastball usage. Some guys can't do this. We're going to talk about Chase Dollander in a second, who's bad at this, but I think could get better. Irvin does a pretty good job throwing non-fastballs early count for strikes. That is good. You should be emphasizing that more. I know I don't like this sweeper thing to oppo-handed hitters, but if you're grabbing the bottom of the zone for strikes, more power to you. Slider, didn't throw it a lot. Again, it's in zone enough. He keeps it down. He keeps it in. It could work. The changeup here, maybe more of a deep count pitch. I think there's maybe an opportunity to like add a kick to it such that it's not miming the sinker as much as it is. But another situation, ahead in the count, even early, if he could zone that pitch at a favorable rate, throw that instead of the fastballs and reserve the fastballs. When he's behind against lefties, sure, if you want to rip this sinker down and try to generate some ground ball contact, it's fine with me, right? You're trying to in behind account situations, you're just trying to limit damage as much as possible. When you're ahead, I'm cool elevating the four-seamer, go to the kick change that I imagine he might flip to. That's kind of my take on him versus lefties. Just rip up whatever he's thought has worked over the last couple years and completely redo it from a usage standpoint. Right-handed hitters, he's not awful against. 9% K- walk. He had a 4.4 skills independent ERA, which is essentially like an expected ERA metric that cares about the kind of ball and play you allow. I've seen a lot worse than this. It's manageable, especially with the sink sweep so heavily that works for him. I just think 33% fastball, 35% four-seamer with 2 strikes, in it allowing a 16% barrel rate in 2 strike situations should be a massive red flag to again, just pull down the fastball usage. Going to be a recurring theme here. So the plan of attack to counter some of the problems he's running into, we're completely reinventing the lefty approach. Again, I don't think he was awful versus right-handed hitters, but there's some really low-hanging fruit from a usage optimization standpoint. To go 4 straight up in the zone, sinker down and give me sweep, give me early count that, play with this bridge slider that it seems like he's tinkered with and hasn't really gotten a feel for. And at the other angle here, you want to go like Galaxy Brain a little bit. I wonder if he could get to even lower of a slot and create even more advantageous of an angle. He's a big dude. He's up at 6'6", and as I mentioned, he has like 7.1 feet of extension. So he's at a below average release point, but I wonder if you dropped him even more. And again, I'm not going to delve into like the biomechanics of whether this is actually a good change for him. But perhaps there's a scenario where even lower of a slot creates some more angle advantage on his fastballs, and maybe more in particular creates more sink on his sinker to allow him to generate less hard contact or at least put the ball on the ground more. What he does as a pitcher is very reminiscent of this modern archetype of Michael King, Clay Holmesian pitchers where you're like a lower slot dude who kind of cuts the ball and you can get to a bunch of breaker shapes, create some sink, also throw a 4. So this works. Like, I think the package of who he is works. Of course, I'd love more velo. But again, if the lowest hanging fruit here is just to completely rip up the left-handed hitter plan, rework it, my confidence level here, I initially had like a 2 of 10 down, just because I'm not entirely sure how confident I am in him being like good. Like Gallen, I was pushing, the realm of like a 3.5 ERA, which is why I put a high confidence on it. I'll probably go like a 3.5 out of 10 here. I felt confident in pitching my changes. I'm just not entirely sure whether they would take in a way that would make him like a 4 ERA pitcher. Maybe like the best case scenario here is like a 4.2. And I'm trying to make these guys good. We're not just going from bad to average or bad to less bad. We're trying to go to good. So not totally confident in even what I'm saying here is better, but I'm confident it'll be better than whatever he did last year, which was really not a good pitcher. Chase Dollander is next, the 9th overall pick in the 2023 draft. Why are the Rockies drafting starting pitchers? I'm not entirely sure, but we could talk about why Chase Dollander, I think, can be better as a pitcher. Who is he? Low arm angle here. It's an approach and velocity fastball. So the shape here is pretty dead zone-y, and especially at Coors Field, it's like really, really bad, and this is why you see his home road splits not be particularly good. It's encouraging to me that he wasn't absolutely awful on the road, so there's some semblance of like, hey, when you get your shapes into non-altitude, look, you're actually a pretty good pitcher. The byproduct of that, to me, is that he's just throwing way too much four-seam fastball here. Again, recurring theme, not totally surprising, a team that I don't think was great at pitching development, brings in a bunch of new pitching people. I'm predicting something here that I think will happen, which is the four-seam usage absolutely should come down. The thing that is like, again, hurts my brain a little bit looking at, his four-seam increased in 2-strike counts, especially at home too here. Just like weird, at least stabilized, didn't like increase by a ton, but it didn't go down. So either he's confident in the pitch, the Rockies just think, hey man, just try to throw strikes with it. I'm not entirely sure, but that's crazy to me. Just from an execution and what you should be doing standpoint, I really don't understand it. And I talked about Jake Irvin, me wanting him in pre-2-strike spots, early count situations, throwing non-fastballs for strikes, and he showed a tendency to do that, so why not do that more and save the fastballs for deeper count situations to put guys away? Dollander doesn't really have that strong of an ability to land some of these non-fastballs in early count situations. So the problem here is that he's awful versus left-handed hitters. Again, recurring theme for some of these righties. And I think he can be better versus right-handed hitters. The way to be better versus right-handed hitters is what I'm talking about. Just more sinker. Just stop throwing the four-seam fastball. Give me a lot more sinker. He tries to go with like this up-away target on the four-seam. It's fine. Like the angle of it might work against right-handed hitters. You see him try to jam up in occasionally as well. But 11% of the sinker is somewhat baffling to me. And the location's got to be inside. There were some situations where he seemed like he was almost like pulling the pitch. I'm not entirely sure if that's mechanical body-wise to release, like how he's actually sequencing through such that he's missing more glove side with the pitch. Usually you see arm side misses with sinkers a lot of the time, which will protect it from giving up damage. Dollander, of course, if he's pulling the sinker across into the zone, is going to give up damage on it. There's probably room for a sweeper here as well. He doesn't necessarily lend himself to like the Jake Irvin style of like, oh, your 85% spin efficiency, this is easy for you to rip this nice lateral breaking ball. But I think the way he throws from the arm angle he comes from and the velo he holds on some of his breaking balls, which are pretty good, like the curveball shape here isn't awful. That is encouraging to me that he could create almost like more of a lift sweeper on top of the curveball to give him a bit more chase away from right-handed hitters when he gets or achieves this race to 2-strike situation that I imagine the Rockies are probably going to push. Especially at Coors Field here. Left-handed hitters, well, again, a bit more of like we need a lot to change here. The four seam's got to be up in the zone overall, in my perspective. I really like, and I haven't said this already, I should have said it earlier, I really like his slider shape. It's hard. It reminds me actually a lot of what Jacob deGrom throws. Now, I'm not saying he's Jacob deGrom. Jacob deGrom had insane feel and control for the velo he sat. Dollander, in the small samples we've seen, has shown nowhere near that control. So he doesn't have the same precision as deGrom, but what they're doing from a release and ball shape standpoint is like roughly similar. It's like this weird kind of cutter. It's tagged as a cutter, but I'd say it's almost more slider than cutter in terms of the actual resulting shape. It's around 90-ish. It's like 4 and 4, so it's caught in between. It's not like a baby sweeper. It's not like a true cutter. And I like this pitch. I just want it more down than inside. If you look at where deGrom's plot is, deGrom loves going like up away four seam and then riding that slider line down, occasionally maybe flipping inside as well. But Dollander is not really doing that. Dollander is just kind of ripping four seam middle up and going inside on the slider. So if he wants to go away, Dollander does with the four seam fastball and push the slider down, I think that could actually work. And I think that slider is really the piece that I would jack up in terms of usage. It's one that won't be affected a ton by Coors Field. So particularly when he's at home, I would push the usage on that pitch aggressively. Changeup rework too. You know, it's super efficient on the spin here. Very similar in shape to the sinker. And it's just 7 miles per hour separation. I don't know if that's achieving what he wants it to achieve. I wonder if there's a way for him to go towards more of like a true split, something that could create more drop and actually generate 2-strike whiff. And you could basically turn him into my Coors Field dream here, which is like somewhat of a split gyro slider guy that doesn't have to rely on four-seam fastball to offhand hitters at Coors Field where it's pretty miserable to pitch there. But if you could become like a 4 ERA guy on the road and then push the crazy ERA he had at home down to like, can he be like a 4.8, 5 ERA guy at home? Then like maybe there's some idea here that he becomes a decent pitcher. But this is just a pretty simple rework of pure usage here, which I think the new Rockies pitching regime will do. The plan of attack, stop throwing so much four seam. We're talking about a sweeper to righties for some chase. I like the lefty location adjustment on that slider down, really pushing the usage of that pitch up. You know, the dream here is maybe a change-up rework. The one thing I will mention, again, we're going Galaxy brain, which I like bringing up. Throw more footballs, which is weird, I know. But I was talking to a couple people in pitching departments about, you know, this concept of like supination, pronation. Pronation, you could create, you know, carry on your fastball some run. Supination, you create these good breaking ball shapes. Is that adjustable? Like the why, first principles behind why someone as a child starts to favor cutting the ball versus running the ball. And I wondered whether it was malleable. And I had one person tell me that they had a pitcher in their organization that they ripped a ton of footballs with. And he slowly started to cut the ball a bit more over time, which made his sinker better. So the idea here being, and again, not an expert in biomechanics at all, but my understanding is that the more you throw a football, what you're doing is basically delaying pronation, which then when you pick up a baseball helps you to cut the ball a bit. Galaxy brain idea, because the four-seam shape on Dollander isn't good and he throws hard, my dream would be for his efficiency to drop such that some of the breaking ball shapes get better. He gets a little more depth on this curve. You could create 2 slider shapes there. The four-seam becomes a little bit cut vert as opposed to this weird ride-run shape, and the sinker adds more drop. It's a dream. That's like a way off in the distance thing. You probably can't do that in one off season with him, but I'd love to see over time him cut the ball more. I wonder if it's just a matter of him throwing more footballs, to use a very interesting proxy that I heard from another org. My confidence here is pretty high. It's crazy on a Rockies pitcher. Maybe I sounded more confident in the Jake Irvin take, but Dollander I have at like an 8.5 from a confidence perspective. I think there's a path for him to not be terrible. And he projects as one of the worst pitchers in baseball. So we're not trying to get him to like league average. I know we were trying to get Jake Irvin down there. I think the Coors penalty, if you could get him like a 4.4, 4.5, that's like a huge win for the Rockies. 4.3, 4.4, man, I would give the Rockies pitching department flowers if they could get him down to that level. Dustin May, the newest Cardinal, was really bad in the first half, also really bad in the second half. Ended up with a 4.96 ERA, pretty bad peripherals as well. These guys are always tougher to dig into because we can't just assume regression. So we have to attack the problems here. First off, who is he? High spin, low slot, cuts the ball, lateral pitcher. He's got this nasty high spin sweeper that he throws, a ton of break on it. I don't even think he really needs to control it that much. He's definitely more of like a stuff over locations guy, which is always a bit tougher perhaps to tinker with from like a playing around with the idea of moving pitches to certain spots because he probably doesn't have the finite command to actually do that. The problems he has, pretty much everything. Not surprising given the near 5 ERA. The thing I want to point out here, so Boston got him at the deadline, and what you immediately saw is a differential between the Red Sox and the Dodgers from a lefty approach standpoint. So how Dustin May should be facing left-handed hitters. What the Red Sox did was embrace the four seam and the cutter. So if you look at his usage with the Dodgers, it was about 32% sinker, 42% sweeper, 19% four seamer. You flip him to Boston, it's 32% sweeper. Okay, so that goes down a bit, but they supplement it by throwing 26% four seam, 22% cutter. They pull the sinker down to about 14%. They throw a little bit of changeup at the end of the year as well, which I like. Basically, Boston said, we like the four seam, we like the cutter. Our idea here is like, okay, let's get the cutter off the plate. The Dodgers were throwing it more on the plate. And as a result of that, it seemed like for some reason the sinker got on the plate more. And that was a general recurring theme you saw in May throughout 2025. The sinker got crushed in the zone. Getting off that or figuring out how to mitigate that is a really good question. It seems like maybe Boston's bet was by pulling the cutter off the plate, putting the sinker on the plate, he would run into less damage, but it didn't really work here. The velo component, of course, is something that matters for him. Perhaps in the past he was throwing so hard it was causing the injuries. We have the correlation between velocity and injuries with him, although I know he's had some fluke stuff as well. Yeah, if he's more 96 and adds a tick, it's absolutely going to help than the 94.5 that he was at the end of the year. I personally like the idea of like mixed diversity to left-handed hitters where he's got cutter in off plate, the four seams elevated a bit more. He throws some sinker oppo-handed, even though I don't love that. It probably is necessary for a guy like him. It just seems like Boston couldn't keep the sinker down enough, and when it was down, it got crushed. So I'm not entirely sure what to do with the fastballs here, I'll admit. I like the concept of going to the changeup. This may just be a raw mixed diversity angle. Versus left-handed hitters, but it is a tougher proposition because he's a low slot guy. His strength is spin. Do you play around with a more downer style curve as opposed to the sweeper? A tough situation. The thing that I was most concerned about though, thinking through that lens of like, if you just limit damage versus lefties, you can crush righties and be a pretty good right-handed pitcher. I'm sure the Cardinals would take that. His righty approach wasn't great. We were talking about the sinker getting crushed down in the zone. We also saw the sinker and the sweeper against righties get beat up in zone. And my thesis here is that if you look at the location of these pitches back in like 22, 23 against righties in particular, sinker was more inside, sweeper was more away. So what you're doing is, I think, creating a comparable lane for those pitches out of hand where they deviate. What we saw in 25 is like, look at the plots converge to just purely down in the zone. So what's happening there, instead of the pitches going like this, what's happening is they're both starting here and kind of like converging this way. So I wonder whether his like release angles out of hand were easier for hitters to pick up, such that if they knew if the immediate break was away from them, it would actually come back in as a sinker. And if the break was into them, it would come back to the bottom of the plate as a sinker. Aligning those, so they're basically like offset release angles. If you could align those a bit more from a location standpoint, maybe he has more success versus righties. Again, a bit more like a galaxy brain angle here. Of course, the prey for velocity is very relevant on a guy like Dustin May. But again, lefty locations, it's a tough one. I have to say, of all the things we're going to talk about here, I'm not entirely sure what he does to left-handed hitters because his mix, I like the mixed diversity angle, but there's only so many things an arm like this can do for strikes and locations, especially when you don't have finite location feel. I'm more confident in him fixing the righty approach, playing around with maybe a changeup to lefties or something, but the righty approach, getting that locked back in and being fine versus lefties is probably a path for him to be like a 4-2-ish pitcher once again, because he was in the past. He was really good in the past. My confidence level here is like a 4.5, 5. Pretty dead even here. I think he can get back to league average. I don't see much upside from him, and I really think it lends itself to the righty approach, despite the fact the larger problem here, you could say, is his lefty approach. Bailey Ober is up next. Really strong 2023 and 2024, 300-ish innings, sub-4 ERA. Fell off a bit last year. The K rate dropped below 20%. He was lingering like the mid to high 20s prior to that. And we're trying to solve for that here. Who is he as a pitcher? Really big dude. He's command over stuff, so we can get a little finite with the raw locations he's throwing to. The problem here is that he's like a very vertical pitcher, four-seam change. And with locations on the four-seam change, he's not like east-west enough for me to go, let me like push and play around with going arm side, glove side on pitches. You kind of just have to stay at the top of the zone with the four seam and go down with the changeup. So the locations are good, but I personally don't think he's like a big command guy because there isn't really anywhere to go with the shapes he's throwing, especially because he has kind of consolidated shapes. Between 24 and 25, to righties in particular, he backed off his four-seam fastball, started throwing more sinker. He's really heavy four-seam change to lefties, then he kind of flattens out his mix to right-handed hitters. Really good top rail four-seam command, which is really what made him strong. And that's probably the first thing I'll point out here, is that if you look, the problems here is that, again, not great for his left-handed hitters. It's the problem we're trying to solve for with all these guys for the most part. But if you look at him, particularly in terms of his four-seam location, what we saw in 25 is it drifted more like away. So I don't know if this was a mechanical thing of him pulling the ball away more, but if you go back to 2024, it was more like up, and then the change was down, and then he adds the sinker in, and it's almost like he pushed the four-seam away, the sinker went down in, and he was like, I don't need the four-seam true up if I'm going sinker in. I could kind of like split it and then go change up down. But that didn't work. If you look at the zone damage he allowed, barrels he allowed on his four-seam in the zone and the sinker in the zone, it was really bad. And that's really what we're trying to solve for here. The changeup's great. It's been good. It didn't really even fall off last year when he was actually able to get into counts where he can use it. It's also kind of a superpower for him because as he turns over lineups, he actually does a really good job of not running into third time through penalties. I don't know if that's just because of how the changeup visually interacts. Hitters just don't pick up on it over time, But that's like really good for him. He's just got to get into situations where he can go deep into the game, which he'd done for 2 years and then really fell off in 25. Is it a velo thing? Maybe. We always bring this up around the velocity side of things. But yeah, righties in particular, the four-seam sinker interaction and changeup off it is a really tough solve. I'm not totally concerned with where the four-seam is versus left-handed hitters. Just seemed like he leaked more down into the zone, was pulling the pitch down into the zone more. Maybe that's a theme we're seeing of like pulling the four-seam down and it's just not working. I will point out, okay, the velo can help in a variety of situations, but where I really think the velo can help is on getting this slider shape he's throwing back to a respectable level. If anything took a hit in his mix from the velocity side, it was this pitch, and the inability for him to throw anything like away from righties or even like roughly inside to lefties. If he could get this thing back into the 86-ish range, even if the shape on it changes, say the velo stays low and he could get this thing into more cutter territory, I just need like some kind of viable glove side pitch for him. This is often a problem you run into with these more vertical fastball changeup guys. Think of like a Jonah Tong or a Trey Savage. They're both going to run into problems creating some kind of lateral shape to right-handed hitters or going in on left-handed hitters. Ober had that in 23 and 24. Even if it wasn't a big part of his mix, I think those subtle pitches you could throw like 8 to 12% of the time to a given handedness, even if not great, are often good like pace changers and weapons you can use versus particular kinds of hitters that are necessary for you to be able to move towards your strengths and preserve your strengths more, go to them more, which is the changeup. So the plan of attack here, I just want more changeup overall, even to right-handed hitters. I know he's got flat mix there, but that's the only pitch that was successful. Sweeper, late count, maybe you go change up more early count for him. I don't think this changeup needs the four-seam fastball, particularly from like a location standpoint to set it up. He can throw changeup first. He's able to zone enough for it to work, generate miss. You could probably even sacrifice some of the third time through stuff we're talking about if you use that changeup more early. I'm fine with that. I just want him better for more innings, or not even more innings. I want him better for fewer innings, and then using the Twins pen or some of the depth starters they have, like Woods Richardson and Mick Abel more. You don't need Ober going 7, 8, 9 innings. And then I really think he needs a slider velo back. I'm a little above average on the confidence here just because the baseline of the changeup's so good that it doesn't seem like a dramatic change to me to push him into an area where the slider velo gets back, and then all of a sudden he's a little more top rail with the four seam. So like 6.5, 7 on the confidence here that he's actually back to a league average pitcher next year. Bryce Miller is the last guy we're going to talk about. The obvious looming dark cloud here is that he had bone spur stuff that he got like a PRP injection for. Seems like he maybe pitched through some issues last season. We can assume maybe some level of health in 2026, or maybe we can, and that's a futile conversation to have. But I still think it's a valuable exercise to go through him, try to understand what changed, particularly something related perhaps to this injury side I'm going to point out. But first, give some history on him. 2023, he just ripped a ton of fastball. Really good pitch, 60% of the time. Awesome. 2024, he iterated, started going, if you look at his plots, I'll show like the difference. Look at how much he added here. Started going downer curve, mixed in a cutter, started throwing sinker, flipped to a splitter, really like expanded the mix. This was a theme among a lot of these Mariners starting pitchers that were really good. Then he run into 2025, kind of got crushed, right? He really wasn't a good pitcher. The bone spurs we talked about. 44-degree arm angle, so he's a little above average. Carries his fastball really well, which is why when you go back to 2023, it makes sense for him to rip the fastball like 60% of the time, and it actually was successful at that rate. But he did adapt. Like, he realized you can't do 60% fastball in the bigs unless you're like Ryan Nelson, I guess, is one of the few guys who does it. But anyways, besides the point here, I think he's got really good hand feel. Now, it's interesting to me that I don't necessarily know what the average spin increase as you go towards breaking balls is. He has strong four-seam spin, and he has hand feel because he's able to get to all these breaking ball shapes as we saw in 2024, but they're not like high spin breaking ball shapes. And I wouldn't say they're all like high velo, high break pitches either. He seems to have some finite control of his fingertips at release, which is interesting to me because his problem, perhaps in 2024 to 2025, as you look, is that he became more efficient in his spin. He jumped about 3 to 4 percentage points. So I would theorize this was perhaps connected to some of the stuff he was dealing with in his elbow. What I mean by being more efficient is like at release, he became a little more like pronated. So his hand was through the ball more as opposed to being more on side of the ball. It's a very subtle difference, but what it did was it added more lift to his sinker by being through the ball more. And what we also saw is like he took away some of those lateral shapes and went more towards that downer death ball curve and the split to lefties in particular, where he had a lot of problems. So he almost embraced, it almost seemed to me like the usage he was showing signified that he was aware he was becoming more efficient and those shapes were playing better. So why not use them more? We saw the sinker take a stuff plus hit, and it wasn't as effective to right-handed hitters. So if he stays in that more pronated slot, I would go back to embracing the four-seam fastball for him, much more like he did in 2023. I'd push that thing back above 50%, hope the velo, like he didn't lose velo despite the elbow stuff. So that's, I would guess, somewhat encouraging, whereas some of the other guys we talked about in this video were maybe dealing with something to pull the velocity down. But I personally want more four-seam here. And then versus lefties, the death ball thing he was throwing really wasn't great from a performance standpoint. The shape looks really good. It's like 84, ton of depth to it, very vertical pitch from his slot. I think in theory can work well, but something about it just wasn't working. It was in zone too much. When it was in zone, it got clipped. This is one of those like stuff plus, like this pitch, but actual execution wasn't great. Maybe a command thing. Maybe it's just a pure two-strike thing, in which case he probably needs like a cutter or something to work against lefties as more of a raw strike pitch. But yeah, it's a weird one. I generally emphasize more depth of mix. And perhaps if you want to get him back to that 3.5 ERA area of being very good, the angle here is for him to go back to cutting the ball and embrace those breaker shapes as we saw in 24, where he was throwing more depth sinker, had 3-4 breaking balls that were all somewhat interesting and effective that he mixed in. But if he sticks in this more pronated position, hangs around like 94% efficiency, to me, I really just want a bunch of four-seam with him because I think that's the way for him to maintain league average production and be good. It's a bit maybe reductionist going back to like a former version of himself, but for me, yeah, that's the way to do it. More four-seam if he can't get back to cutting the ball more. So he's a bit contingent here on a lot of things compared to some of the other guys we chatted about. And my confidence is going to go flat at like a 4.5 to 5.5, right at that 5 window. It's a tough one to peg because I don't know what I'm going to see from actually what he's doing with his hand standpoint come 2026. I don't know what his health is. There's obviously some of that risk in there, given that it doesn't seem like he had surgery to remove the bone spurs. And I'm not entirely sure if bone spurs just like go away. So it's a tough one. He's a really tough one to peg. Maybe the move here, if he struggles, is just to move him back into more of like a multi-inning relief role, where he just rips 60% fastball, the velo jumps up a little, and you could preserve him until, I hate to say it, but maybe he needs surgery at some point. Really fun pitcher who looked great in 24, who almost seems like he has to get back to the 23 version of himself if he sticks with what he showed from a hand standpoint. So that's what I got on this video. Thanks for joining me as always. Going back to the screen share style. I need to get some analysis, and I gotta rework the analysis chops here as we get into 2026 and start to pull out some breakout picks. I have some cool ideas coming down the pipeline on YouTube here. My Substack's also going to be changing a bit from a structure standpoint, but I encourage you to check it out. I'm going to be putting more things behind the paywall there, I think. So if you're not already a sub, check it out. I get very nerdy on there, very similar to what I was doing here, but even more depth. Hopefully this is somewhat digestible for even the average baseball fan. As always, thanks for checking out my channel, and take care.